For decades, The Sound of Music has been celebrated as one of the warmest, most beloved films ever put on screen. Generations of families have watched Maria twirl on that alpine hillside, hummed along to Do Re Mi, and cried during the wedding scene. But behind the polished, technicolor charm of this 1965 classic lies a collection of surprising truths, hidden mishaps, and quiet departures from reality that most viewers never noticed. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the making of this legendary musical, counting down 20 fascinating details that reveal just how much artistic license went into telling this true story. Stick around, because some of these will completely change how you see the film. Before cameras ever rolled, Julie Andrews had to learn something from scratch that audiences would later believe was second nature to her character. She had never touched a guitar in her life before landing the role of Maria. To convincingly play and sing simultaneously on camera, she spent weeks training with an instructor, practicing chord shapes until her fingers ached. Singing and strumming at once proved far trickier than she expected, and by her own admission, the coordination required nearly broke her concentration during early rehearsals. To calm her nerves before certain guitar-heavy scenes, she occasionally reached for a small glass of Austrian schnapps, a local spirit strong enough to steady jittery hands before the cameras started rolling. Her co-star Christopher Plummer underwent similar preparation, taking both singing and guitar lessons to convincingly portray Captain Von Trapp. Despite his effort, none of his musical performance made it into the theatrical cut. The studio ultimately dubbed over his vocals and guitar work with a professional musician, meaning the voice audiences associate with the captain was never truly his own. One of the film's more lighthearted moments, the rowboat capsizing into the lake, hid a genuinely frightening incident behind the scenes. Kim Carruth, who played the youngest Von Trapp child, Gretel, could not swim at the time of filming. When a boat flipped as scripted, every child actor tumbled into the water alongside Julie Andrews, who was meant to immediately scoop up little Kim. But the fall knocked Andrews off balance, and she toppled backward instead of reaching the girl in time. Carruth swallowed a significant amount of lake water during the chaos and became ill almost immediately afterward, ultimately becoming sick directly onto Heather Menzies, the actress portraying her older sister Louisa. Thankfully, the young actress recovered quickly, but the moment remains one of the more startling behind-the-scenes stories tied to a scene audiences still find funny today. Christopher Plummer's relationship with The Sound of Music was famously rocky. He found the material overly saccharine for his taste, and he wasn't shy about saying so. Over the years, he coined several biting nicknames for the production, referring to it privately as that movie or joking that it should have been called The Sound of Mucus. His discomfort during filming reportedly led him to overeat and drink more than usual as a coping mechanism, and as a result, he gained a noticeable amount of weight partway through the shoot. Costume designers had to quietly let out and retailor several of his outfits to accommodate his changing frame. Despite his early cynicism, Plummer later softened his stance, acknowledging just how deeply the film resonated with audiences worldwide, even if it never became his personal favorite among his own body of work. The grand estate audiences associate with the Von Trapp family is something of a cinematic illusion. The real residence where the family once lived still stands today, but it bears no resemblance to what appears on screen. The house in the film was actually stitched together from two separate buildings, one used for exterior shots of the front facade, another for the back. All interior rooms were built entirely as studio sets in Hollywood, meaning none of the family's private scenes were shot anywhere near Austria. Even the iconic gazebo, the setting for 16 going on 17, was a constructed prop rather than an existing structure. That gazebo has since been moved twice and now resides at Hellbrunn Palace near Salzburg, where visitors can see in person. Meanwhile, the courtyard shown for Nonnberg Abbey wasn't filmed at the real abbey either. A set designer built a replica so convincing that many tourists still mistakenly believe those scenes were shot on location. Even the tense graveyard hideout sequence, where the family evades Nazi soldiers, was filmed entirely on a studio backlit in Hollywood, despite some Salzburg tour guides continuing to claim otherwise. Many viewers assume Edelweiss is a genuine piece of Austrian folklore, perhaps even mistaking it for the country's national anthem. In truth, the song was written entirely in the United States for the original Broadway production. Every piece of music with an Austrian flavor throughout the show was composed by the legendary songwriting team of Rodgers and Hammerstein. Edelweiss hold a particularly bittersweet place in history, as it was the final song the pair ever wrote together. Oscar Hammerstein passed away not long after the stage musical debuted, making this gentle tune something of an unintentional farewell. Ironically, its emotional sincerity was so convincing that it fooled audiences across the globe into believing it was authentic Austrian heritage. Long before Hollywood became involved, a German film producer approached Maria von Trapp about adapting her memoir, offering a payment for the rights to her life story. Maria, hoping to also share in future profits, asked whether royalties might be possible. The producer told her German law forbade royalty payments to non-German citizens, a claim that sounded official enough for her to believe. By that point, Maria had already become a naturalized American citizen, so she agreed to the terms and signed away her rights. Shortly afterward, the same producer returned and convinced her to accept a slightly reduced lump sum in exchange for immediate payment. Given how little the family had earned from performing up to that point, the amount felt substantial, so she agreed once again. It was only later that Maria discovered the supposed law never existed at all. She had been misled into giving away complete control over her family's story for a modest fee. To their credit, Rodgers and Hammerstein voluntarily provided the Von Trapps with a small percentage of the show and film's earnings, despite having no legal obligation to do so. Still, it amounted to a fraction of what the family could have received had the original deal never happened. Remarkably, Maria harbored no bitterness about the situation, later stating that the joy the story brought to people everywhere mattered more to her than any missed earnings. Contrary to what the movie suggests, Maria wasn't brought in to look after all 7 Von Trapp children at once. She was originally hired in 1926 to tutor a single child. Captain George Von Trapp, a retired naval officer, needed help caring for his daughter, who happened to share Maria's first name, after the girl developed scarlet fever, the same illness that had taken the life of George's first wife years earlier. Because the illness prevented her from making the long walk to school, George reached out to the nearby abbey for assistance. The nuns selected a spirited 21-year-old named Maria Augusta Kutra, who had trained at a teaching college and was staying at the abbey while dealing with health issues of her own. The arrangement was only supposed to last around 10 months before she returned to pursue life as a nun. Of course, history had other plans, and she ended up staying far longer than anyone anticipated. Screenwriter Ernest Lehman envisioned only one actress for the lead role from the very beginning, Julie Andrews. Director Robert Wise, however, initially leaned toward other options, including Grace Kelly, who had left acting behind after becoming Princess of Monaco, and Shirley Jones, already well known for her work in musicals. Everything shifted once Wise viewed early, unreleased footage from Mary Poppins. Andrews' screen presence convinced him almost instantly that Lehman had been right all along. Interestingly, Andrews herself wasn't fully sold on the project at first. She worried the story might come across as overly saccharine, echoing concerns she'd had about certain stage productions of the musical. Learning that both Lehman and Wise shared her desire for a more grounded, authentic tone put her mind at ease, and she ultimately signed on for a fee of $225,000, a considerable sum at the time. Her performance would go on to become one of the most cherished in cinema history. The real George Von Trapp bore little resemblance to the stiff, emotionally distant father portrayed on screen, a depiction that reportedly upset his actual children later in life. Yes, he genuinely used a distinct whistle signal for each child and dressed them in matching sailor-style outfits, but he never forced them to march in formation like miniature soldiers. Author Tom Santopietro has suggested it was actually Maria who initially struggled with emotional openness, having grown up in a harsh, unaffectionate environment herself. Johannes von Trapp, the family's youngest child, once told the BBC that his father was warm, generous, and nothing like the rigid military figure shown in the film. He also noted that his mother tried unsuccessfully to convince filmmakers to portray George more accurately. One key figure from the family's real story never appears in the film at all. During the financial devastation of the Great Depression, the Von Trapps lost much of their fortune when their bank failed, forcing them to rent out rooms in their home to make ends meet. Among their tenants was a Catholic priest named Father Franz Wasner, who recognized the family's natural musical talent after hearing them sing and eventually became their musical director. Under his guidance, the family transformed from casual singers into accomplished performers, and he remained with them even as they fled Austria, touring alongside them across Europe and the United States. Despite being described by biographers as the true musical architect behind the Trapp family singers, filmmakers chose to omit him entirely, replacing him with the fictional character Max Detweiler. The decision, according to those involved in production, stemmed from concerns that featuring a priest as a music teacher might distract audiences from Maria's own arc. Maria Augusta Kuchera's early life was marked by tragedy. She lost both parents as a child and was raised by an uncle known for his harshness. She eventually attended teaching college, developed a strong connection to Catholicism, and joined the Nonnberg Abbey to begin training as a nun. While the film paints her as timid and soft-spoken, the real Maria was anything but reserved. She later admitted to causing considerable disruption within the convent, describing herself in a 1980 interview as mischievous and difficult to contain. She broke dishes, spoke during periods of required silence, ran through the courtyard, whistled sacred chants meant to be treated with reverence, and even climbed onto the convent's rooftop. Far from the calm, obedient character portrayed on screen, the real Maria was full of energy and occasional troublemaking. In the film, Maria and the Captain marry roughly a year after she arrives as governess, right as political tensions in Austria begin to escalate. In reality, their wedding took place in 1927, more than a decade before